Rage 2 arrived in 2019 with considerable fanfare, promising to combine id Software's legendary shooting mechanics with Avalanche Studios' open-world experience. The result was a game that, despite moments of genuine brilliance in its core combat systems, ultimately collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions and design missteps. What should have been a triumphant return for the post-apocalyptic franchise instead became a cautionary tale about how even excellent gunplay cannot compensate for fundamental flaws in narrative coherence, world design, and respect for the player's time. The most glaring issue plaguing Rage 2 is its complete inability to establish a consistent narrative tone. The game suffers from a severe identity crisis, constantly oscillating between attempting to be a serious post-apocalyptic drama and a tongue-in-cheek B-movie parody without ever committing fully to either approach. This tonal whiplash creates a jarring experience that undermines both potential directions the story could have taken. The serious moments fall flat because they're immediately undercut by forced humor and over-the-top characterizations that feel more like rejected Marvel movie quips than genuine wit. Characters deliver exposition about the devastating effects of the authorities' tyranny and the struggle for survival in the wasteland, only to immediately pivot to juvenile jokes about bodily functions or pop culture references that feel painfully out of place. The game desperately wants to be Guardians of the Galaxy or Thor Ragnarok, but lacks the writing talent and character development necessary to pull off the delicate balance between humor and heart. Conversely, when the game does attempt humor, it comes across as trying too hard, relying on the most superficial elements of successful comedy without understanding what makes those elements work. The jokes feel manufactured and focus grouped rather than organic, as if the development team studied popular memes and catchphrases without grasping the context that made them funny in the first place. This results in dialogue that sounds like it was written by an algorithm trained on superhero movies and internet comments. The protagonist, called Walker, embodies this tonal confusion perfectly. Depending on the scene, they are either a stoic wasteland warrior haunted by loss or a wisecracking action hero delivering one-liners. This inconsistency makes it impossible to connect with the character or understand their motivations, as their personality seems to shift based on whatever the current mission requires, rather than growing organically from established character traits. The voice acting and cutscene direction compound the narrative problem significantly. While some voice actors clearly understood the assignment and delivered their lines with appropriate energy, many performances feel phoned in or mismatched to their characters. The disconnect between the serious apocalyptic setting and the cartoonish delivery creates an uncanny valley effect that makes every story beat feel artificial. Cutscenes suffer from poor pacing and awkward staging that makes important story moments feel like amateur theater productions. Characters stand around in obviously posed positions while delivering exposition, with camera work that feels static and uninspired. The facial animation and character models, while technically competent, lack the subtle expressiveness needed to sell emotional moments, making dramatic scenes unintentionally comedic and comedic scenes simply uncomfortable to watch. The game's attempts at humor during these cutscenes are particularly painful, with characters mugging for the camera in ways that feel completely divorced from the harsh reality of their supposed circumstances. It's difficult to take seriously a character's emotional breakdown about losing their community when 5 minutes earlier they were making jokes about explosive diarrhea.
You got the skill for the kill, I grant you. These goons are thoroughly dead.
Despite its numerous failings, Rage 2's shooting mechanics represent some of the finest first-person combat ever created. The weapons feel weighty and impactful, with satisfying auto design and visual feedback that makes every shot count. The movement system allows for fluid, acrobatic combat that encourages aggressive, mobile playstyles rather than cover-based campaign. When the game allows players to simply engage with its core shooting mechanics, it briefly transforms into something approaching greatness. However, However, this excellence is severely undermined by the limited variety of both weapons and skills available to the player. The weapon roster, while individually well designed, feels anemic compared to other shooters in the genre. Players quickly find themselves using the same handful of weapons throughout the entire experience, with new additions feeling more like minor variations on existing themes rather than genuinely different tools that encourage tactical adaptation. The skill system suffers from similar problems, offering incremental improvements to existing abilities rather than fundamentally new ways to approach combat encounters. Most upgrades feel like mathematical increases rather than meaningful gameplay changes, reducing character progression to simple number increases rather than expanded tactical options. This creates a sense of stagnation despite hours of play, as the core combat loop remains essentially unchanged from beginning to end. The enemy variety also contributes to this problem, with most encounters feeling samey despite different enemy types. The AI behavior patterns become predictable quickly, and the lack of truly distinct enemy factions means that firefights begin to blur together regardless of location or context. The driving mechanics in Rage 2 represent perhaps the game's most fundamental misunderstanding of what makes open-world traversal engaging. Rather than serving as an enjoyable activity in its own right, driving feels like an extended loading screen between actual gameplay segments. The vehicles handle adequately, but lack visceral feedback and customization options that make vehicular travel genuinely entertaining. The open world's design exacerbates this problem by spreading points of interest so far apart that driving becomes unavoidable, yet providing so little interesting content during these journeys that the time feels completely wasted. Unlike games like Mad Max, which made vehicular combat and exploration central to the experience, Rage 2 treats driving as a necessary evil to be endured rather than enjoyed. The lack of meaningful interaction during travel segments means that players spend significant portions of their playtime simply holding down the accelerator and occasionally adjusting direction. This transforms what should be moments of anticipation and world exploration into mindless busy work that actively detracts from the pacing of missions and story beats.
My father was a great man. Everyone tells me he's a great man, but he built the base of Wellspring. He did, but my father, he lacked vision to merge power and economics.
The mission design in Rage 2 reveals a fundamental disrespect for the player's time that permeates every aspect of the experience. The typical mission structure follows a painfully predictable pattern. Drive 5 minutes to reach a quest giver, ride an elevator up to their location, watch a cutscene filled with cringe-worthy dialogue, ride the elevator back down, drive another 5 minutes to the actual mission location, engage in perhaps 1 minute of genuinely fun shooting, then drive 5 minutes back to report completion. This structure transforms what should be exciting combat encounters into extended slogs, padded with meaningless busy work. The actual shooting segments, the parts of the game that actually work, are buried beneath layers of tedious traversal and exposition that serve no purpose other than artificially extending playtime. It's as if the developers recognized that their core content was limited and decided to stretch it thin rather than creating more meaningful encounters. The elevator sequences are particularly egregious examples of padding, serving no narrative or gameplay purpose while forcing players to wade through artificial loading disguised as world building. These moments break up the flow of missions and create dead time that kills momentum just as players are becoming invested in the action. Even worse, many missions end up with the requirement to return to the quest giver for a brief conversation that could easily have been handled through radio communication or environmental storytelling. This forces players to retrace their steps through empty landscape they have already traversed, adding insult to injury by making completion feel like an additional chore rather than an achievement. The side activities scattered throughout the Rage 2's world represent busy work disguised as content, rather than offering meaningful diversions that expand the world or provide interesting gameplay variations. These activities feel like items on a checklist, designed to pad completion statistics rather than enhance the player's experience. Most side activities boil down to variations on go to location, kill enemies, collect upgrade materials with minimal variation in execution or reward. The upgrades themselves typically provide minor statistical improvements that barely impact gameplay, making the entire system feel like a Skinner box designed to trigger completion impulses rather than provide genuine progression satisfaction. The activities lack the narrative context or mechanical variety that might make them worthwhile diversions, unlike games that use side content to explore character backstories, world lore, or unique gameplay mechanics. Rage 2's optional content feels completely divorced from the main experience, existing solely to fill out an open-world checklist. This approach transforms exploration from an exciting prospect of discovery into a tedious process of clearing map markers. Players quickly learn to recognize the hollow nature of these activities, leading to a sense of obligation rather than enthusiasm when encountering new optional content. Despite its visual polish and technical competence, Rage 2's world feels fundamentally empty in ways that go beyond simple population density. The game world lacks the environmental storytelling and organic discovery that make exploration rewarding in successful open-world games. Locations feel like set pieces rather than lived-in spaces, with little evidence of the communities and conflicts that supposedly define the post-apocalyptic setting. The lack of meaningful random encounters or dynamic events means that travel between locations becomes monotonous, with vast stretches of landscape serving no purpose other than creating distance between objectives. Unlike games that reward explorations with interesting discoveries, lore, or unique encounters, Rage 2's world feels like empty space punctuated by obvious objective markers. This emptiness extends to the supposedly populated areas as well. Towns and settlements feel like movie sets rather than functioning communities, with NPCs that exist solely to dispense missions or vendor services rather than creating a sense of a living world. The lack of ambient activity or believable daily routines makes these locations feel artificial and undermines the narrative premise of rebuilding civilization. The limited fast travel system represents another major quality of life failure that compounds to the game's pacing problems. While players can fast travel between major settlements, the inability to quickly return to recently visited locations or mission areas forces repeated traversal through empty landscape that adds nothing to the experience. This limitation feels particularly punitive given the mission structure that requires constant back and forth travel between quest givers and objective locations. Players frequently find themselves making the same journey multiple times, with no option to skip the tedious driving segments that pad out mission completion times. The fast travel restrictions seem designed to force players to engage with the driving mechanics in open world, but this backfires by making those elements feel mandatory rather than optional. Rather than encouraging exploration, the limited fast travel options make the world feel like an obstacle to overcome rather than a space to enjoy. The game and landscape offers numerous examples of how to execute the concepts Rage 2 attempts, making its failures feel particularly frustrating. The Far Cry series demonstrates how to balance humor and drama in post-apocalyptic settings while maintaining narrative coherence and respect for player time. Even Cyberpunk 2077, despite its own troubled launch, shows how to create meaningful side content and world building that enhances rather than detracts from the core experience. These comparisons highlight how Rage 2's problems stem not from impossible design challenges, but from fundamental misunderstandings of what makes open-world games engaging. Games like Horizon Zero Dawn prove that post-apocalyptic settings can support both serious themes and lighter moments without sacrificing narrative consistency, while titles like Doom Eternal or the newest Doom Dark Ages show how to create meaningful progression systems for shooter mechanics. The existence of these superior alternatives makes Rage 2's shortcomings feel less like inevitable compromises and more like design failures that could have been avoided with better understanding of the genre and more respect for established best practices. Perhaps most frustratingly, Rage 2 contains the bones of what could have been an excellent linear shooter experience. The core combat mechanics are strong, and they are strong enough to support a focused, curated experience that emphasized the game's strength while minimizing its weaknesses. A linear structure could have eliminated the padding and pacing problems while allowing for more carefully crafted encounters that showcase the shooting mechanics. The narrative problems could have been solved by choosing a consistent tone and sticking with it throughout a more focused story campaign. Without the need to fill an open world with content, the development team could have concentrated on creating memorable set pieces and meaningful character development rather than spreading their efforts across dozens of forgettable side activities. The cringe-worthy Marvel movie wannabe elements could have been replaced with more authentic humor that grows naturally from the characters and situations rather than feeling forced and artificial. A linear experience would have allowed for better pacing of both action and humor, creating a more cohesive overall experience. Rage 2 represents a masterclass in how excellent core mechanics cannot salvage a fundamentally flawed overall design. The shooting feels phenomenal, but it's buried beneath layers of padding, poor pacing, narrative inconsistency, and general disrespect for the player's time that transform what should have been a celebration of gunplay into a frustrating slog. The game's failure stems not from the lack of ambition or technical incompetence, but from fundamental misunderstandings of what makes open-world games engaging and how to balance different design elements into a cohesive whole. Every strength is undermined by corresponding weakness that feel entirely avoidable with better planning and design focus. In the current age where the players have limited time and unlimited entertainment options, Rage 2's approach of padding thin content with busy work feels particularly tone-deaf. The game demands significant time investment while providing minimal respect for that investment, creating an experience that feels more like obligation than entertainment. Ultimately, Rage 2 serves as a reminder that great individual components mean nothing without thoughtful integration and respect for the player experience. It is a game that could have been great with different design decisions, making its actual execution feel like a waste of considerable talent and potential.